Hello, Atul Uchil here on behalf of the Professional Speakers Federation to talk to you about how to complete your speech after a blunder. What is a blunder, you may ask? Simple. A blunder is any embarrassing mistake that happens during your speech. Now, these may be something that you said or did, or it may be a result of something completely outside your control, mechanical failures, etc. And when you participate in enough speaking engagement, believe me, the possibility of blunders happening goes up exponentially up in there. If it can go wrong, it will, So my philosophy while speaking, especially in terms of blunders, is be prepared but also be flexible. So I plan for what I would do when a blunder happens, but I'm also flexible to the circumstances. Let me tell you a little bit more about blunders. Typically, 90% of the time, blunders can be categorized into the following three categories. They happen as a result of something you said or did or didn't do: misspeaking, mispronunciation, omission, saying the wrong thing, or simply forgetting your next line. It happens. It could be a mechanical failure that affects your speech only. The microphone goes down, your projector goes down, audio-visual malfunctions. These things happen. And then, finally, there are the larger issues that impact the arena or the venue as a whole. The fire alarm going off or the electricity shutting down the entire building. These things, although rare, do happen with frightening regularity if you speak frequently. The more you speak, the chances of something like that happening, like I said, goes up. So let me tell you what I do in item number 3 first, which is the larger issue, and then I'll come to items number 1 and 2. Every venue has some kind of emergency procedures. Before I conduct any speaking engagement, I meet with the management, or the building security, whoever's in charge, and get a copy of their emergency procedures and keep them with me in my pocket. No need to memorize these, because if this eventuality happens, somebody has already planned this for you. So in case something happens, I just read these at the top of my voice, making sure I'm heard by enough of the audience so they can communicate to the rest of them. If the electricity goes off, I shout it at the top of my voice. And if the fire alarm is going off and the microphone is still on, I'm still pretty loud, because now my microphone has to be louder than, or what I say on the microphone has to be louder than the fire alarm. Let's talk about mechanical failures that affect your speech only. Things like, the projector going off. And that's happened to me in the past. I was giving a presentation and I turn around and the screen is blank. I told the audience, folks, there's supposed to be a picture of an apple with an arrow through it here, and just imagine an apple with an arrow. Obviously my projector is down, but we can use our imaginations. And you know what? The crowd pretty much agreed. The microphone goes down, speak loudly. And ask them, can you hear me? Okay, the crowd generally understands, the public, people who have come to hear you speak. If you admit you have a mechanical failure, they will work with you. Don't get frazzled. That's the most important thing. And then the last and the most important of the blunders is something that you do. Now, when you say the wrong thing or forget your next line, please, and I say this, please do not be afraid to pause for a moment or two and take 2 or 3 seconds to collect your thoughts. Do not blurt out anything that comes to mind right away. Give time to consider your next words, because what you say can either maintain, enhance, or destroy your credibility. So if I forget the next line, I will just tell, hey, God, folks, guess what? I forgot, and I'm human. Give me a second. What was I talking about? And get back into the speech. It's okay. You're human. You're not a machine. So my philosophy when speaking is be prepared but be flexible. I know I said this before. And I'm going to give you an example. God, a couple decades ago almost, it's been almost 22 years, time flies. I was in South Texas for almost 6 or 7 weeks in South Texas, and didn't have the opportunity to come home on the weekends. I was stuck there managing a project. I was a consultant at the time. Well, I guess I'm some extent a consultant even now. And I asked the client, people at the client said, "Hey, what do you folks do on the weekends?" And the unanimous answer was, "We go to church." I had forgotten I was in America's Bible Belt, and I'm non-denominational, and I was like, "Hey, folks, what's a good church where I can go to? I'm non-denominational." Several of them suggested a church, and I don't remember the name of the church, but they all said I should go to that church because of this pastor called Pastor Greg. I'm like, "What's special about Pastor Greg?" Well, Pastor Greg delivers this beautiful sermon. He's flawless. His speech is flawless. Now, in those days, I was a budding speaker, so any tips I could gather from anywhere, I'm like, sure, I'm going to go. I want to hear this man speak that everybody's raving about. So I go to this sermon a couple of weeks in a row, and you know what? Pastor Greg's sermon was 35 minutes on the dot, plus or minus a few seconds. His words were careful, measured, perfection. So I went up to him. I'm like, "Pastor Greg, I came here. I'm an out-of-towner, and people told me about your sermons, and it's amazing how you can time them so well." Pastor Greg's response was, "Son, I am prepared." "What do you mean, Pastor?" He says, "Oh, you see these 7 leaves of paper?" And he showed me 7 8.5 by 11 ruled paper, single spaced. He had handwritten. Now this is 22 years ago. Don't forget. He had handwritten his entire speech right down to every pause and everything. And he says, "It takes me 5 minutes to read at the pace at which I read through 1 leaf of paper. 7 papers, 35 minutes. I'm like, "That's interesting, but Pastor, I'm a consultant and I preach, be prepared but be flexible." Pastor's response was, "Son, if you're well prepared, you do not have to be flexible." Now, this was the young Atul, 22 years ago. I was a little reckless, rash, I guess. So don't judge me for what I did next. The following week, page 5 of Pastor Greg's sermon ended up in my possession. Don't ask me how, and don't judge me. Now, Pastor Greg is reading this sermon. He was talking about the creation of man, and he goes through the sermon. It's beautiful as ever. Page 4, and Adam said in the Garden of Eden, and Adam says to Eve. He turns the page, he looks, and he stops. I'm not kidding you. He stops. See, he was not flexible. He was prepared. He knew what he had to read, and when he realized that that page was not there, he just stopped. He looks at the audience, he looks at his piece of paper, and he stops. He was not flexible. He was prepared. He wasn't flexible. So my closing comments to you with regards to blunders is, make sure you have a plan. Take a minute or two to consider. If you end up in a situation, take a minute or two to consider what you're going to say next. Don't blurt out what comes to mind. And I bet somebody, if you're wondering what happened with the Pastor Greg story. Well, my next speech in this series talks about how to use humor in your speaking engagements. And I will complete Pastor Greg's story in that segment. So please listen in for how to use humor in your speech. That comes up next. And I have to leave you hanging.